All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michelle Bernard, and I am honored to be a co-chair for the Week of Positive Change, Nonviolence, and Opportunities. We're going to get started now. We are waiting for our microphones to be delivered, so we're going to do this the old-fashioned way and start off speaking very loudly. Please excuse us when people come in with the microphones. It is my honor to get us started today by introducing Dr. Stephanie Myers. She is the co-founder and national chair of Black Women for Positive Change. She is vice president of the R.J. Myers Publishing Company. She's going to give us opening remarks today, and her topic is De-Escalation of Violence, lessons learned from 6 years of annual weeks of nonviolence. So with that, I welcome Dr. Stephanie Myers to the podium.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here. You know, I kind of decide in life you've got two kinds of people, your regular, ordinary folks, and then there's this category of people known as zealots. And zealots are people who get up in the rain, get up at 6 and 7 in the morning, and find a way to transport themselves to a building that's almost inaccessible. And so, thank you for being here, and we really appreciate that. I am the national co-chair of Black Women for Positive Change, and we have another co-chair who is Dawn Hester, who's the treasurer of Norfolk, Virginia. So she sends her regards this morning to you as well. We really appreciate the opportunity to co-convene this conversation this morning in collaboration with Congresswoman Gwen. The Congresswoman is in Milwaukee today because she's running for re-election, like so many members of Congress are. So we appreciate her staff helping us do this, and they'll be kind of floating in as the day goes along. Our purpose today is to really focus on a concept that many people don't understand very well, and it's this concept of de-escalation of violence. When I talk about it with people, some people ask, what does that mean? And a lot of us really don't know. So that is our goal here, and we do have representatives from some of the congressional staff offices who are here now and who will be joining us. Who's here so far from the congressional staff office? Okay, good. Senator Pamela's office, Senator Harris. And so we're glad to have you here. We hope a few others kind of float in as the morning goes along. We want to thank our co-conveners who have worked with us to put together this conversation, the National Black Nurses Association, the 100 Fathers, Inc., DC chapter of Moms Demand Action, the Northern Virginia chapter of National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, NOBLE, and the 3rd District of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. And I want to ask you to join me in just giving all of our partners a round of applause. Each one of our partners will be represented on the panel this morning. You're going to hear from a panel of visionary experts who will share their own personal perspective about this de-escalation of violence concept and what it means and how you get trained for it and what impact it can have. We know that unfortunately here in America, violence has been commonplace really for centuries. And we hear about it on the news, and we know from history that it's just become a part of our culture. So our organization, Black Women for Positive Change, is working to find ways, and our theme is to change the culture of violence. Now we know that's a huge goal. Change the culture of violence in America and the world. But America has achieved other huge goals in history, so we know we can do this too. And I'd like to introduce Danielle Smith, who's with our Baltimore Black Women for Positive Change chapter. We have a whole network of people here who participate with us, our good brothers, Tabidi Boone, and Robert Fairchild, and Diane Wood here, and Bobby Vick. And so we just appreciate everyone being a part of it. And Michelle Bernard, this is her 2nd year as our honorary co-chair, and we really appreciate you, Michelle, and what you do. We learned about de-escalation of violence because this is our 6th annual year of nonviolence. Sometimes we change the name. This year we're calling it Positive Change, Nonviolence, and Opportunities. And as we move around the country, we hear from young people about what they're thinking. And it's really a way that we kind of get this feedback. So last year, or maybe 2 years ago, we were planning for a press conference at DC City Hall, and we were sitting in the conference room with Dr. Millicent Gorham as we were preparing to go out on the steps of City Hall. And we got on the subject of violence against nurses. And she began to teach us about what goes on in emergency rooms. And we know Dr. Congress is going to talk about this as well. And we were really shocked to learn that our nurses, I think nurses are like next to angels, the work that nurses do. And it was just shocking. And then we learned that Congresswoman Gwen had introduced a bill in 2016 on de-escalation for law enforcement. So we met with her a couple of months ago and said, Congresswoman Moore, your bill for law enforcement is terrific, but why not broaden it so that nurses and teachers and other people in different segments of society can learn this skill? So that's what brings us here today. Today is really the kickoff of the 6th annual Week of Positive Change, Nonviolence and Opportunities. There are flyers outside, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. So just in closing, I always like to remember a young man in Pittsburgh who during our 3rd year of the Week of Nonviolence, we were talking about the causes of violence and what does it all mean and how does it all begin. And he said to me in a crowd of about 200 or 300 young people, he said, Dr. Myers, we don't want to be lectured about violence and nonviolence. We want opportunities. He said, we want to be great and no one is showing us how. And I just thought that was such a comment from such an insightful young man, 17 years old. So this morning we're hoping that we'll all be inspired and to say to the millennials and the young people, you can be great. Take on this mission of de-escalation of violence and transform the country and the world. And that's a way that you can be great. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. Quickly, I'm going to ask one more time, if you are here representing a member of Congress, would you just raise your hand and introduce yourself and tell us whose office you're with over here?
Hi, my name is Katisha, and I am with Representative Pete Aguilar from California, District 34.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. You?
Hi, I'm Adela. I'm with Representative from California, District 35.
Californians in the house. Thanks for joining us. You?
Hi everyone, I'm Marissa. I'm from the Office of Rep. Correa from California's 46th District.
Thank you so much for joining us. I saw hands over here from Senator
Senator
Congress.
Will from Senator Congress's office.
Okay, and you?
I'm Cassie from the same office.
Okay.
Mackenzie Fields from California. Lily from Senator Harris's office.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Did I miss somebody? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Ashley, and I'm from the Congressman and Grandmother's office, District 74.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. So with that, I am going to start off, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Millicent Gorman. Dr. Gorman is eminently qualified to talk with us today. She has an MBA. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Nurses. She is the executive director of the National Black Nurses Association, and her topic this morning is Don't Hit My Nurse, Stop the Violent Assaults. Dr. Gorman, thank you.
That's okay. She got it.
Gorham.
Good morning, everyone. Here is my disclaimer. I am not a nurse. If anybody in here gets sick, there's folk over here. I can't do anything for you but lay my left hand on you and start to pray. I'll flip open my cell phone and call 911. That's all I got, okay? I am Millicent Gorham. I am the Executive Director of the National Black Nurses Association for 24 years. And I started, just for my congressional colleagues, I started my career up here on Capitol Hill in 1978. So there is life after the hill, just what you want to know. But moving on to Don't Hit My Nurse, Stop the Violent Assaults. Did you know that there is still a nursing shortage in this country? There are roughly 3 million nurses. As of 2022, the U.S. will need 1 million more nurses. Why do we need so many nurses? There are not enough faculty members to teach. There are not enough clinical sites to train. The cost of college education continues to climb, and nurses are retiring. So imagine if you had to have elective surgery, or your mother or father were hospitalized because of a serious illness. Your arm on the Congressional staff kickball team, all to find that one of the reasons why nurses were not available was because hospital patients verbally or physically assaulted them, even resulting in injuries, even resulting in death. Here's another reason why nurses are leaving the hospital and the profession. These are adult patients scratching, biting, pushing, slapping, hitting, knifing, clubbing, and shooting nurses. These incidents take nurses away from their assignments as they become patients themselves. This is disruptive. The situation escalates because it pulls other members of the care team into play. The security team, the nurse supervisor, the charge nurse, and perhaps the physician, to evaluate the issue and adjust assignments. And then there is a psychological and emotional toll of being verbally or physically assaulted. Do you think the nurse can concentrate on getting you better, fearful of the next explosive attack? Moreover, the hospitals lose in terms of worker compensation losses and in time off due to injury. Even though nurses who have worked years in psychiatric facilities and emergency rooms may be used to this behavior, it is still frightening when the shot-up gangbanger and crew are followed into the ER by the rival crew, or the opioid-induced or intoxicated patient comes into the ER belligerent or mentally incapacitated, yet agitated and needed to be restrained. And here you sit with your broken arm or leg from playing soccer, with the triage nurse taking your vitals, assessing your needs, giving you pain meds, waiting to take you to x-ray, and violence erupts in the emergency room. What you need to know is that almost all of the emergency room nurses have experienced workplace violence, and most of it goes unreported. Moreover, the rise in violence may be reflective of the surrounding community. Our nation's opioid crisis and the increasing use of synthetic drugs are contributing factors to the escalating violent assaults on nurses and other healthcare workers. Hospitals are extremely concerned about these incidents and are trying to come up with best practices in response. The issue is one of safety for the patient and the nurse. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources data revealed that there were nearly 17,000 incidents reported. Studies suggest that half of the physical assaults on nurses and up to 80% of the verbal abuse goes unreported. Hospital violence prevention programs reduce the risk of assault by training the nurses to recognize frequent cues such as drug use, threatening body language, dementia, or intoxicated patients, and educating them about strategies to help diffuse situations. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration issues guidelines for violence prevention programs, but there is no federal statute requiring hospitals to adopt them. While NIOSH and progressive hospitals have online training programs, there is no substitute for live, hands-on training. So what's the plan? Safety is the #1 priority. Nurses must ensure the safety of the patient and staff and others in the waiting area. That means that the nurse has to look out for you, your safety, the safety of the other healthcare providers, and others waiting in the waiting area or on the floor. One study suggests that there are 3 themes to violent situations: cognitive impairment like dementia or intoxication, delivering care that causes discomfort such as using needles, drawing blood, or hanging IV bag or feeding tube, preventing the patient from leaving the hospital or ER. So the initial approach to de-escalation should always be verbal in an attempt to engage the agitated person and work to reach a more calming state. Don't match threats. Don't give orders. Don't talk loudly. Don't use aggressive body language. Don't stand over them. Yourself with a potentially violent person. Acknowledge the person's feelings, offers choices and hopes. Lay down the law and set clear limits. Get a team to restrain a patient if necessary. Contact security. Keep an open path to leave. Leave. One of my nurses that I talked to in a New England hospital said they provide 8 hours of de-escalation training upon hire and 4 hours every 2 years. And within their medical record system, they've created an alert system so that if they already know that a patient has been violent before, that patient registers in the hospital, the system is alerted. They will have security at the bedside of that patient, and then they create a plan for the patient's care. So don't hit my nurse. I need my nurse. You will need a nurse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gorham. With that, I should point out, we're going to save questions, make notes. We're going to take questions from the panelists one at a time after everyone speaks. And now I would like to introduce Commissioner Frank Malone. Commissioner Malone is the president and founder of the 100 Fathers, Inc., and his topic today is reactionary masculinity, an element that can escalate violence. Commissioner Malone?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the Black Women for Positive Change, these distinguished members of the panel. I'd also like to thank Mr. Robert Fairchild of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, which I'm a member, Mr. Tabidi Boone for being here to support. Also, we had an elaborate PowerPoint for you today. However, I've learned that you always have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. I want to thank Akila, our Executive Secretary of the 100 Fathers, would you raise your hand, for helping with this magnificent PowerPoint, and I will send it to you if you email me. Let's get started. What's funny about being here today is that Mr. Fairchild and Mr. Boone and I have walked these halls together for Omega Psi Phi to bring about the change that we all believe in with fatherhood, because we know the importance of fathers and men to change the paradigm of young men. So when we talk about de-escalation, we're going to go back to where violence has captured itself. Take a look at what that means and try to show you how we can de-escalate, prevent, and do some alternative things. And it's called reactionary masculinity syndrome. It's a phrase coined from Dr. Amos Wilson, one of the foremost psychologists on black crime. Many of us say, how can Black lives matter if we're killing black people. We have to stop and show some respect for ourselves and each other, as well as teach respect for our fellow man. And so the title of my presentation today, and also I got to start off with a joke. Well, you know, I am a cancer survivor, a Guillain-Barré survivor, and some more things. And I know near my God to deep that I'm only here because of nurses who helped to keep me alive. So I want to let you know how much I appreciate you, because I'm only here on extended warranty. You understand what I'm saying? But when I got married a few years ago, I got duped. I didn't get duped, but anyway, she said I had to adopt these kids. So I adopted, married, and Shanita, and they're 19 years old. So about a few years ago, we went and made a magnificent presentation in California on the developmental assets for men to change the paradigm for men coming out of jail and that thing. So I picked my kids up from school, I'm driving home, and the phone rings in the car. Lo and behold, it's Barack Obama. And he said, Frank, I heard about the magnificent presentation you made. I want you to know we're behind you. Keep doing the fatherhood thing. You won't see me a lot, but I've been in the White House several times, done some things. He said, anybody else with you? I said, yes, Mr. President, my son and daughter. My daughter's in Cheney right now. My son's home trying to find his way. So he said, well, how you kids doing? They said, we're doing fine. They said, well, how you kids doing in school? So my daughter said, I'm doing great. My son said, not so good. I said, don't ever tell the president that. Tell him you're trying to make it, you're trying to get yourself together, but don't ever put yourself down, son. And that was a big joke in the family about how do you present yourself? How do you look forward to overcoming, superseding, and achieving? So today we're going to talk about de-escalation versus annihilation. Because surely what's in a person's heart and mind before that gun, before that evil, before that act occurs is the reason for the violence we have today. So if we can change how you think and change how you feel, we might be able to change how you act. Currently, we're at Ballou High School right now, working with the young men over there to change the culture of that school. How do we do that? Well, we want to deliver a nonviolent youth using fatherhood and mentoring techniques that still make a difference by incorporating informed knowledge, fatherhood, trauma-informed care. Because somebody told me, you walk around in the community and you hear gunshots, that's trauma. And then use developmental assets to take a look at what a child has, what they don't have, and replacing it. Now, what is the impact? How do we get these violent acts? Why is it there's currently 166 murders in this region alone, Washington, Maryland, and Virginia? What is the cause of that? Well, the cause of father absence is poverty, early sexual activity, depression, drug and alcohol usage, poor educational performance, suicidal thoughts, behavior problems, teen pregnancy, low self-esteem, criminal behavior, sexual abuse, fear of abandonment, mistrust of others, and other emotional problems. Now I want to say this, that because of the work we've been doing over the years, father absence is no longer a problem in the United States. That father absence has dissipated now because of the work of the many organizations, Black Women for Positive Change, 100 Fathers, and other groups. Father absence has dissipated. But I want to talk to you about reactionary masculinity. Herein lies a look at how we change the heart, the mind, and the soul of an individual. It says in my Bible, it says, study to show thyself approved. You can't walk up on somebody and change them if you haven't studied to have the information, education, and destination necessary to make that change. What is it? Reactionary masculinity syndrome is when a black male's futile attempt to assert his manhood and regain some kind of power and respect by actively or passively rebelling against racial oppression, white male authority, but in a way that is harmful to himself, his family, and his community. In other words, let's take a look at manhood. These are the elements of reactionary masculinity syndrome: manhood, respect, power, fatherhood, and racial discrimination. Now, how do these line up? First of all, the first question we ask when we go to work with a young man is, what is a man? Because you can only be who you think you are. And if no one has street teaches you to be, respect. Who do you respect? Who do you honor? You can't call our women out of their name or any woman out of their name. You can't disrespect yourself or your fellow man. And so without respect, you cannot live a life that's going to bring you the things that we're trying to help you to get. Power. What is power? Is power a thing or is it your being? We changed the thought of power. It's not some 22s on a car riding down the street. It's not a gold chain that you wear to show that you have something. Power is the intellectual, emotional ability to be a man and to be a responsible individual in your life. That is the power. And then but many of them don't have a father in their life. And so we become that surrogate father, that respected man in their life that can give them guidance, information, and positive affirmations. And so racial discrimination is intentional and unintentional, but it exists. And for a person that does not know about manhood, respect, power, and fatherhood, surely the pitfall of incarceration, violence, and death will be their end. So reactionary masculinity syndrome leads to incarceration. Violence is the violence we want to change. This is the de-escalation we see. Now, what we're talking about here is the ability to bring these factors in with our young men. In other words, we're saying, instead of spending money on incarceration, how about let's go to prevention? How about let's train up a nation of people who bring guidance, love, understanding, connection, engagement, enlightenment, which leads to empowerment. But if you don't love them, nothing will happen. We got called, we've been to Woodson High School, Phelps High School, we're in Prince George's County, and across the nation with our trained men. Remember, the Bible don't say walk upon somebody if you don't know the Bible. You remember the saved somebody and the demons jumped on them because they weren't properly trained. And so what we're talking about, it's like the other day I was cooking on the grill. Sort of first sunny day, went out, but I didn't have a whole lot of food, but I wanted the food to be good. So I took just a little bit of salt, and put it in my meat with some other spices and herbs. Wasn't 21, it was more than that. Put some herbs and spices in there and changed the whole flavor of the meal. That's who the fatherhood movement is. We are the salt of the earth. It's not going to be everybody, but those men who are trained with the information, the education, and the commitment can make the de-escalation happen by changing the heart, souls, and minds of those who we touch. So how do we apply it? There's three things that we have to remember in de-escalation: prevention, intervention, and innovation. We have to get into the young schools and prevent them from thinking the wrong way so that they won't act the wrong way. What we say is we want you to walk right, talk right, act right, and pretty much things can be all right. But if you don't have those things lined up, you're headed for failure. Then intervene. We can heal young men that have a problem. We can heal out of jail. We can make a different way for them. We can connect, engage, and change. And then we have to innovate some new ways of funding opportunities, getting them a job, having a man to stand with them and guide them along the way. It's more than mentoring. It's fatherhood and mentoring. And I want to say we have some strong women working in our organizations that understand that very point. And so, to wrap up, prevention is the cure. Prevention is the de-escalation needed for 2018, 2019. What is it? A change in the family, more programs in the schools, a look into the recreation centers where we bring people with positive identity, sports teams, those coaches. When we were speaking in Ballou the other day, I was just grateful the coaches came up to our room. And one of the questions, one of the workshops that we do is called values voting. We put the guys in a group and we separate them. And you can agree, disagree, or you're not sure. Well, one of the statements I read is, it's okay to use violence if you've been disrespected. So some will go to this end, yeah, I want to shoot him. Some will go to this end, no, you can't do that. And some are not sure. And the conversation ensues and the learning takes place. And I have men in there to give the right answer, but we have to get the guys moving around. Like Doc, you said, they have to be apart. They have to be shaking and moving. This is called experiential learning, where you're learning by doing from men of promise, progress, and commitment. And so I'm also a member of the Police Citizens Academy. I have the number for Chief Newsham. If I have a young man that needs something, I said, Chief, the only way I'm gonna back you is if I can't call you when I need you, I don't need you. And so I went to the academy. I walked in there with the little play gun in the little city and got shot. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't paying attention. They have cap guns, you know, the city over there, and they let you patrol, and I'm patrolling. But I'm saying we bleed over to all areas. We also need legislative help. We also change laws. We have to change the laws to meet our needs. And finally, the community at large. And so there is no magic bullet. This is no pun intended. That will make this go away. But they're promising answers that have gone heretofore ignored, that are here at the table to make the difference for every young man in this country if we can properly fund de-escalation. My name is Frank Malone. My time is up. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Malone. Commissioner Malone, we will make sure that your PowerPoint presentation is uploaded on Black Women for Positive websites for everyone.
We'll send it. We'll send it off.
Great. All right, I'd like to introduce now Dr. Valda Crowder. Dr. Crowder is with Capital Health Partners and is a member of the DC chapter of Moms Demand Action, and her topic today is the intersection of mental health and violence. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Crowder to the podium.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my talk is a little bit more interactive, so be prepared to participate. Okay. Now, first of all, violence is really a clinical symptom of medical and also psychiatric illnesses. It can occur with any type of illness, dementia, lupus, sarcoid, as well as various mental illnesses. If you think about our current system, we assume first that violence is a conscious behavioral bad act, and we arrest the person first, right? We ignore and do not do any screening for medical or psychiatric origins, right? This is harmful because it leads to diagnosis or their care. So imagine if you have a heart attack, and because you have a heart attack, you're put in jail, and then you come out. That's essentially what we're doing right now in our current system. We make these assumptions very quickly. De-escalation techniques allow for interactions to be slowed down so that more accurate assessments can actually be made, and possibly the arrival of medical expertise. So I want to talk for just a second, and I want to give a couple of examples, okay? So I'm going to use an example of one particular diagnosis, which is intermittent explosive disorder. So this is the person that goes crazy, the road rage person. One small thing sets the person completely off, okay? According to the national NIH, it affects 7% of the population. So that's 20 million people, okay? In someone's lifetime that has IED, they will have 40 incidents of destroying property or injuring or killing a person. 40 instances. So 20 million people will have 40 violent incidents. So that's 800 million. So where are they occurring? They're occurring all over the place. So I'm going to give an example of what I experienced this past weekend. I was working in the emergency department, and down the street from me, a 17-year-old was working at McDonald's. A customer came in and asked for coffee. He gave the customer coffee, and he processed the person, charged them $1.25. Then afterwards, the person asked for cream, and he said, "We don't have any cream." And an argument ensued about not having cream. He said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any cream." So then the customer threw the hot coffee in the 17-year-old's face. And he came to the emergency department to see me for first and second degree burns on his face and on his neck. So now, this person probably has intermittent explosive disorder. Probably. I didn't see that particular person, I didn't see the customer, but the police were called. The police are going to arrest him, and I can guarantee you he'll be held in jail for maybe 30 days, maybe 60 days, and then he'll be coming to a neighborhood near you ordering coffee, right? So we have to realize that if we do only incarceration, we are not solving the problem, okay? This teen was traumatized in his first job. His job had no particular resources. If there was, when you talk about de-escalation, there needs to be de-escalation trained people all over the place. Just like we have right now, we have automatic defibrillators. If I'm at a sporting event, a defibrillator will, and I have a heart attack and I lay down on the ground, a defibrillator will come out of nowhere. People who are actually trained, the de-escalation training, need to be trained all over the place. So I encourage those of you who are from the Congressional office to realize that this really needs to be ubiquitous. Now, I wanted to actually talk about a couple of other things. How does someone with these problems actually get treated? How do they get diagnosed? They have to get diagnosed by a psychiatrist. So for those congressional staffers, let me tell you a couple of facts. 60% of the counties in the United States do not have a single psychiatrist, not one. If you're in rural counties, Colorado, California, the middle of the country, 80% of the counties do not have a single psychiatrist. These counties are clustered together such that you must actually drive through 2, 3, and 4 counties to go see a doctor. That would be like having to go from Baltimore to Fairfax County. Right? So when you look at why these violent events are actually coming up and becoming more and more frequent, it is because of the lack of providers and the lack of our ability to actually get treatment. One of the things that Moms Demand Action is supporting is red flag laws, which allow household family members to petition the judge if a family member is mentally ill to have the guns and weapons taken out of the household. Those red flag laws need to be extended so that physicians can do that. As a physician, if you have a seizure, I can write a letter to DMV and your driver's license is immediately revoked until you are seizure-free for a year. There is no such ability. If I know that you're violently ill, violently mentally ill, there is no ability for me as your physician to do anything about that if you're a danger to yourself and your society, other than hold you for 72 hours. In the 73rd hour, you can go back home to your gun. So let's look at a couple of examples that all of us actually know about, right? And I want to actually part of these things. Okay, so, and I want to actually go over a couple of things. So, the Sandy Hook event, was there mental health involved? Yes, there was mental health involved, correct. Okay, was there a failure? Obviously, okay. Now, the shooter in the Sandy Hook event, he was, I think maybe he was 17 or 18 years old. Does anybody know at what age was he actually screened mentally and determined that there was an issue? 4 years old. 4 years old. So this was not something that we had known this for a long time, right? The other thing with that, in that case, was that he was seeing a psychologist rather than a psychiatrist. A lot of people don't know the difference. A psychologist is a PhD, very good with counseling, therapy, but not good with diagnosis. They don't do a residency and they can't prescribe medication. Psychiatrist can prescribe medication and can diagnose. He had gone to Yale and seen a psychiatrist, which properly diagnosed him. The mom took him to a psychologist because he didn't want to take medications. So there's doctor shopping involved when you actually don't get the diagnosis that you actually want. Okay, let's talk about another one. The Aurora movie theater shooting. Was he seeing someone? Yes, he was. He was actually drawing violent pictures of people being shot. Again, the psychiatrist or psychologist that was seeing him had no one to report it. She knew he was dangerous, and she said she had no one to report it to. Now let's talk about one a little bit closer to home, Freddie Gray. What happened there? Anybody know? You're from Baltimore.
Yeah, I was gonna say, was that more so like the police officers had an issue?
The police officer? Yes.
Yes, that was more so like the police officer had an issue. I mean, he had the regular issues of the young black man being determined because of his environment and all those other things. But it was the police officers who actually escalated because of their innate ability of how they looked at him or viewed him.
So it's even worse than that.
Oh yeah.
It's even worse than that. So the police officer that initiated the Freddie Gray, that chased Freddie Gray, that was the police officer that initially chased Freddie Gray, had actually had 2 mental health holds in 18 months. He had been involuntarily committed to a mental health institution with all his service revolvers taken away from him. He was cleared to go back to work and to work on a neighborhood near you by a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, who was seeing 100 patients a day and getting paid $40 an hour. And Freddie Gray had been lead toxic from the age of 4. So that was part of the reason why he was hanging out on the street. So I just want to sort of, these things happen and we often don't actually look back at them. And in medicine, what we do is we do a sentinel event analysis. So whenever anything occurs, we actually go back and actually figure out the positive nature of it. And I think that it is important that as we have the dialogue about gun violence, that we realize that these things have been investigated, and we're in the discourse, we're occurring like each violent event is new. And we have no information and no data and no knowledge or learning from what occurred previously. However, mental health and the availability of mental health, the availability of guns to those that are mentally ill is a significant problem in our society. So I just wanted to actually provide that perspective.
Thank you so much. We are now going to hear from Deputy Chief Gary Hart. Thank you. Deputy Chief Gary Hart has spent 29 years in law enforcement and has served 26 years with the Washington Metropolitan Airports Authority Police Department and the last 3 years with the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy. He is a life member with Noble and serves as the president of the Northern Virginia chapter. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So let me get this right off the bat. I spent 26 years with the Airport Authority Police Department. I am retired from there. So if any of you ever used the airport and had to go through arrivals and departures and got run off of the roadway by one of those officers, it was not me. Let's get that straight. I am retired from that career now. But I am here representing Noble, and Noble really appreciates this opportunity to be at the table. Noble hasn't really formulated a position on de-escalation training, but I want to talk about some of the things that we do with de-escalation training and how we feel it can be a positive thing for not just law enforcement, but for civilians as well. Noble, one of our missions in Noble is education, and one of the things that we do in the form of education and trying to bring consciousness of law enforcement to the community is through our Law in Your Community presentation. So we truly believe that information is knowledge and knowledge is power. Anybody know who we can attribute that quote to? WOL. I don't know who originally made the quote, but I'm going to say I got it from G.I. Joe back in the early 70s. And I always like to throw that quote out because it allows me to evaluate the experience of the audience, because some people are like, who the heck is G.I. Joe? But those people in my age group understand who G.I. Joe is with the Kung Fu grip. But they used to end their show with information is knowledge and knowledge is power. But they would say that's only half the battle, because if you don't apply it, is it Joe Madison?
Joe Madison.
I gotta quote him as well. I gotta give him some credit as well. Thank you. But if you don't apply that knowledge, then it doesn't do anything for you. So one of the things that Noble does is the Law in Your Community presentation. And so Noble realizes that de-escalation training is great. It is good for law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies all across the nation have started to implement more de-escalation training. And a lot of the information came from the speakers before me and talking about slowing things down for law enforcement officers. So cover plus distance equals time. So if you're able to separate yourself from the situation, acquire some cover, some distance, that gives you a little more time to evaluate what's going on and hopefully give you a better time to make a decision. But because knowing that that's only half of the battle, we also have to educate others. And so the Law in Your Community presentation is a program designed to address or educate children ages 13 to 18 and how to respond during law enforcement encounters. Because if we only train the officers in de-escalation techniques, that's only half of it. The officers are only part of an encounter. They also have to talk to those that they're going to encounter. And so we talk to youth about how to respond, how to handle themselves and to prevent incidences from escalating, and how to prevent them or to help bring them down. And so that's some valuable information that we share with them. And everybody walks, we try to send them away with some tools that they can use, not just in law enforcement encounters, but other encounters as well. It really resonates with them when we talk to them about things that they do to upset their parents. And we'll ask them, hey, have you guys done anything before to upset your parents? And of course, the hands go up. And so we ask them at that point, because they sometimes want to know, well, what happens if I'm in an encounter and the situation is already escalated? What can I do? And so we talk to them about that, and we tell them, well, have you ever upset your parents before? You didn't pick up your clothes, you didn't do your homework, or whatever the case may be. And of course, their hands go up. And so we ask them, do you know the right buttons to push to set your parents off, as well as what not to do to get yourselves killed? And of course, all of the hands go up as well. Don't look at me like that, you guys. You guys know, those of you that have children, when they have pushed you to that edge, and they know the buttons to push. So we talk about how, in that situation with their parents, what they can do to not get themselves an additional punishment or get their phones taken from them or whatever the case may be, and that resonates. And so that's a great program that we do, and so we see how teaching de-escalation to children and youth, we also understand how it's not possible for law enforcement to be everywhere at the same time. Everybody understands that it takes a community to police a community. It takes the citizens to be involved, right? Everybody understand we can't be everywhere at the same time? All right, let me test you real quick. You ever been driving down the street and somebody cut you off and you say, where's the police when we need them? Of course you have. I was in the car with my wife not too long ago, riding down the street, somebody cut her off or whatever, and she goes, where's the police when you need them? I'm like, I'm right here. But it's not possible for them to be there all the time. So when the nurses are being assaulted, it's not possible for the law enforcement officers to be there all the time. In fact, a lot of times we get there after the assault has already taken place. And so in my beliefs at the airport, the irate situations involved ticket agents and those that worked in the airport, TSA agents, because everybody comes to the airport 2 hours ahead of time. They have plenty of time to get through security when the line is backed up. They have plenty of time to wait in the ticket line to change their flight when their flight is, of course they don't, right? People get there 15 minutes before their flight and get mad at everybody that made them, that's helped preventing them from getting to their flight. And so irate situations happen. And so we've been to those calls for service where and you can tell where someone maybe has some training in interpersonal communication skills and they have not. Because when you get to the scene, you're trying to figure out which one made the call. Is it the person that's trying to fly, or is it the ticket agent? Because they're just as irate as the person they're talking to. And so there is some value in having taught that person some interpersonal communication skills, some de-escalation skills, some conflict resolution skills. And in the airport environment, it's not long. We have a lot of officers patrolling a small area, and so we get there fairly quickly. But if you take that to, again, to the hospitals, and you take that to the schools, and if it's a school where there is not a resource officer on the scene, it may be a while before an officer gets there. So having teachers, administrators, nurses, and others trained in conflict resolution techniques, de-escalation techniques, could help prevent incidents from escalating. In fact, teachers may be on the scene, and talking about a school setting, teachers may be able to see incidents as they're starting to develop and be able to intervene and prevent things from escalating in the first place. And so certainly I see their value in training multiple people, as you mentioned, not just a small group, not just the officers, because again, that's just half of the battle. The officers, that's great. They absolutely need de-escalation. They need to train other parts of the community as well. So if we believe in community policing and it takes a community to police a community, then we need to share that training as well. Just one of the drawbacks, and I guess if I didn't say this, is that de-escalation training, that type of training, conflict resolution training, has limitations. And so along with that training, we need to ensure that we talk about the limitations as well, and that these citizens aren't putting themselves in harm's way. They're not trying to do the job of police officers. They're just trying to keep things from escalating. Give a little more time, as you mentioned, for people to kind of make conscious decisions, calm things down, and in some cases, police may not be needed. In some cases, situations calm until the police get there. So is there value in expanding this training? Absolutely. Absolutely, there is value in expanding this training, not just to law enforcement, but to other parts of the community as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. A quick note about the agenda before I introduce our next speaker. We're going to have our next speaker. Then Dr. Myers, from what I understand, has an exciting announcement to make, so we will hear her announcement, and then after that, we will go to Q&A. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce, last but not least, Marcus Hughes. Marcus is the president of the Next Generation Action Network for the DMV and is a good brother co-chair of the Millennial Committee for Black Women for Positive Change Network, and his topic today is de-escalation and violence, a millennial perspective. Marcus, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm always used to the millennials being last on the roster, so. But
we saved the best for last.
Absolutely. But thank you all for being here. It is important that we do have one of our own in the presence. Congressional staffers, and I'm seeing that they too are millennials. So we all know the work that we have to do and put up with when we're dealing with our bosses, and so we also understand that by having, I'm going to be real, we also understand the importance of why we need to be in the room, because sometimes our bosses do not understand from our perspective what are the needs for our next generation, which is why we are supposed to be here. Each generation is supposed to look out for the next. And that's a great segue to introduce myself as the president of Next Generation Action Network. And we do just that. We make sure that we create ways for our youth to have the tools necessary for them to be the leaders of tomorrow today. And as a millennial, and when I was first introduced to Congresswoman Moore's training, it took me back to the 90s. If you can believe being in the 90s. I was in the 90s, so I'm too. Well, we all were. But in the 90s, there was a teacher that taught us, it wasn't de-escalation, but it was actually peer mediation and emotional behaviors, and how to be able to detect when your buttons are pushed and how to communicate that so that it can help us to de-escalate a situation before it went into a place where you won't have to, you can't really take back. And because we received that training, we were able to recognize ready to get to a level that would not be appropriate for the classroom, and we would be able to take the time to gather ourselves. But if we were not able to do so, what we instilled was a peer mediation board where classmates were able to come before, we were able to go before our classmates with our grievances, with the individual that pressed the buttons, and we were able to create a plan for us to be able to go back into the classroom and to continue on to further education, which was very important for us because it did help us to be able to keep a classroom where we felt safe, and we also learned how to communicate. So I applaud Gwen Moore for the de-escalation training, because that type of experience that I received is the type of experience that I want to see the students in our classrooms, the police officers who are responsible for patrolling our streets, our nurses who are taking care of us, and also ourselves when we're doing bonehead things and we find ourselves in the emergency room. But most importantly, it is going to help us to be able to create a safer America, which is in the room right now in the nation's capital, because you are fighting for a segment of America. So imagine if we were to be able to create individuals in California and the other areas that you all are representing today to bring a piece of resource that can help them to detect a problem and then respond to the problem. And I differ from my brother from Noble, because I understand that by doing so, it can decrease the need of the police, because it would train our residents, it would train our ministers, it would train our teachers, it would train our basketball coaches to be able to learn of the issues, but then we can be able to direct individuals that we detect or have violent tendencies to the necessary resources to help them to get the need, which is why I think this is important, because we all know that we have that family member that we know is touched in some type of way, right? We all know at Thanksgiving dinner, that one person that's going to be at the table that we're going to have to watch a little bit more, right? Well, this de-escalation legislation will help the family members to be able to not only detect it or make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself and you're not going to hurt any one of us, and we're going to be able to enjoy this turkey without it getting thrown all over the place, correct? So that's, when I think of de-escalation, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a more peaceful community that is going to be able to be a little more educated on how do we be able to start recognizing and helping one another. I really strongly feel that society today has disconnected from one another. We are so prone to pushing for ourselves to look out for what's our next move. And sometimes in doing so, we overlook the person that's beside us. De-escalation training will make us and put us in a position where we would have to be watchful of individuals, but we also have to have a level of care for the people that surround us, so that we'll be able to look beyond ourselves and our agenda, because we all know that we're all doing some awesome things, but it will also make sure that those individuals that surround us is being recognized as well, because a lot of people that are having mental issues or having mental issues related, or issues, a lot of their reactions is a cry for help. They want people to recognize there is a problem, and I know there's a problem. I don't know what it is. That's why we need the doctors here. So therefore, we'll be able to say, yes, you have a problem. I don't know what the problem is, but here's a resource that we can help you to be able to recognize those things. So I urge each and every one of the millennials sitting here with the notepads taking the notes, when you go back to your offices, to make sure that it is your boss recognize the importance of why we need this de-escalation training bill, why it needs to be passed. It's not more so that, you know, it's just something that is going to be a favorite thing to do, because we already know this is not a sexy issue. But It is more so holding them accountable and helping them to recognize that this has more to do with our generation, making sure that our children are going to get what is needed more so than anything else. Because that's what's most important. Sometimes they can overlook our generation even though we're right there in the room, you know? Well, this is a way for you to go back and say, look, this is really important. So when Ms. Congresswoman Gwen Moore goes before Congress and she is presenting this before you, I want you to make sure that you recognize that you've heard it from me first, but then take action and support her in this initiative. It's important not only for the staff, it's not important not only for the community, it's important for our nation, because this nation is going to be the nation as far as I'm concerned, as long as I'm working. That's going to set the pace and the tone so other nations will have to pay attention to what we're doing, and then we can be able to expand and help across the world. That's how peace spread. And that's the way that we want to push it. So I want to thank you all for being here with us and for listening to us. And I encourage you strongly, take this back to your office and make sure that it's something that your boss pays attention to. And then also remind them of the important work that you do, because I commend you all of what you do and what you put up with, because I too have to do the same things that you do. So I feel it.
Thank you so much. Marcus Hughes, 2024, 2028. Can we expect to see you running for something? You like that? Absolutely. Dr. Myers.
Well, I just want to be sure that everyone sees what is outside the door here, because this is just so wonderful and such a fulfillment of what our purpose here today. As you walked in, you each had the opportunity to grab off the table on the letterhead for Congresswoman Gwen Moore. And I just want to take a moment so that we're all making sure that we know this, that today, dated today, the day of our discussion here on Capitol Hill, the Congresswoman put out an announcement, become an original co-sponsor of the National De-Escalation of Violence and Community Safety Training Act of 2018. So it has moved from being a concept, which is what our purpose was today, to actually becoming something real. And I want to thank her staff, members of Congresswoman Gwen Moore's staff that are here. Chris Bolson, who's the Director of Legislative Affairs at ISRA, Ms. Mitchell. It says, dear colleague, I urge you to join me in co-sponsoring legislation that I will soon introduce to provide grants to increase access to de-escalation training that may help reduce and prevent violence. As many of our communities struggle with how to respond to violence, it is critical that we consider ways to increase the use of tools, such as de-escalation, that can help prevent conflicts in the first place. Unfortunately, access to such training can be limited enough. The benefits can be enormous. While much attention has been placed on increasing such training for law enforcement, it ignores the impact that sharing those skills with a broader range of community stakeholders, including teachers and others, can have. The bill would establish a program to allow eligible entities such as churches, schools, community colleges, or state and local governments to provide de-escalation training to targeted groups, including at-risk youth. This training would have to be culturally competent, emphasize verbal and physical tactics, to minimize the need for the use of force with an emphasis on communication and negotiation, and utilize techniques that can be used by a wide range of audiences, including those with disabilities and behavioral health issues. For more information or to sign on as a co-sponsor, so for the staffers, here it is, get your boss, sign on as a co-sponsor, please contact Ismira Itch, I'm sorry, I mispronounced her name, Ismira, in my office, and the phone number's here and her email. Sincerely, Gwen Moore, Member of Congress. It doesn't get any better than that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so exciting. So we are going to go to our Q&A period now, and what I'll do is I'll ask if we have a question. I'll go here. I saw the hands. Please stand up, state your name, your affiliation, ask your question, and let us know who you are directing it to, and I will have them answer your question. I'm going to go here first.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Myers, this is for you. Dr. Myers,
what's your name and affiliation?
It's Tabidi Boy again, Omega South. Dr. Myers, a couple questions. With the bill, how would they identify the trainers for the program, what that program would just look like, you know, for the organization? You heard the different scenarios and experiences from the panelists, you know, whether it's nurses, father groups, law enforcement, millennials, like what would that look like? And then the last question is, what can we do as organizations to get behind the bill and push it forward?
Okay. Well, the Congresswoman's bill would really provide funding to a federal agency, and that federal agency, it most likely would be a Health and Human Services, perhaps in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. And that agency will work with an advisory committee to develop input from stakeholders, us, in terms of how this should be developed. Funding would go, the Congresswoman was asking, I believe in her original draft discussion was $100 million per year for 5 years. And those funds would go across the country. Now it sounds like a lot of money, but you're talking $2 million a state. You know, so it really can narrow quickly. But the money would go to grant organizations that are skilled in de-escalation of violence training. And there are organizations out there. So one of the things I hope our millennial brothers and sisters do is to get competent in this field and be ready. There are programs that do certify people in de-escalation right now. We need to find out who they are, where they are, and how to create more of them so that there can be a capacity built within the community. What can groups do? Our wonderful partners, 100 Fathers, Omega Psi Phi, Noble, Moms Demand Action, Next Generation Action Network. Get busy. We've got to get the Congress people to co-sponsor the Congresswoman's legislation. She introduced a bill in 2016 to provide de-escalation training for law enforcement. I don't think it passed. So we've got to really get out there and help her. She can't do it alone.
Does it require letters of endorsement? What does it require to push it?
Letters to your congressman asking him to co-sponsor this bill would certainly be the first step. She needs co-sponsors. There are 535 members of Congress, I believe. We need as many of them, 100 of them, 200. Moms Demand Action, that's where you guys are so effective. We need as many, because this is really, I don't want to say an easy solution, but it's an innovative, and it doesn't involve guns. It's, to me, a terrific solution. So let's line up members of Congress as the first step, and members of the Senate. That's the first step. They've got the whole ball game. And once they vote for this and pass it, then we have to get an appropriation, get the money assigned. That's down the road. So right now, just do the public awareness that you can to get the word out. And many of you work with fabulous institutions. You work with the National Basketball Association and all the athletes. So ideas you have for terrific people like LeBron James, you know, who can sign on to something like this. That makes it happen. It makes it work.
Can I just, I know you didn't ask me the question, but I'm going to just piggyback on what Dr. Myers said on putting on my, in addition to what she said, just standing back from the perspective of the media, I think a major media public awareness campaign, whether it's social media, television, radio, writing op-eds, is really critical. And also, I think people need to effectively figure out who the audience is. So, for example, there are, I would venture to guess there are probably certain members of Congress who assume that someone who goes out and shoots a theater full of people is not mentally ill, but is just a bad person. So, you know, the health angle to me was such an eye-opener, and I think that it could help a lot of people look at the issue very differently. So I would just add that I think all of that is important. All right, we had another question back here. Mariah has the mic, and she'll go. Oh, okay. Oh, he asked your question. Okay, so Mariah back here. You're next.
Hi, my name is Cassie Goodrich. I'm with Senator Harris's office. Thank you so much for this panel. I really appreciate sort of all of the perspectives that you brought today. Just a question on your design, and sort of this is for the whole panel. When we talk about sort of de-escalation programs, I think a lot of the panelists talked about the fact that many of these incidents, like with nurses, are going unreported, or in the community, they're just sort of not tracked, they're not reported. So how would you envision these these types of programs, de-escalation training, you know, how do you envision their success being measured, right?
Metrics.
I want to respond to a program that's already in action. We're currently funded to do some work at one of the schools in D.C. called Baloo High School. And what we've been asked to do, and why we've been asked to do, is because we have certified the master follower trainers of rites of passage. Within the scope of that, we do a type of conflict resolution training. And what we're doing is creating, by next semester, we hope to create and pay a group of young men in that school who will be leaders. And those leaders will have the skills of conflict resolution, de-escalation training, and be able to support a new culture within that educational institution. But the funding, what we had to do was try to get funding and then promise them that we're going to give them some stipends to individuals in the school that support leadership, conflict resolution, and bring a new culture into that school.
In response to your question also, prevention is hard to measure and evaluate. I was responsible for the Just Say No campaign when I was in the federal government way back when. When you do a preventive campaign, it doesn't happen. So it's always hard to measure how did you keep it from happening. So we have to develop a model for measuring the effectiveness of prevention. I don't know yet what that model is, and Commissioner Malone just referred to some things. But I know when I would go around the country and talk to an 8-year-old and say, what does Just Say No mean? And they would say, don't do drugs. That was enough for me. And we could prove that the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders did have a greater awareness of not using drugs. So it may be with de-escalation. We have to develop slogans and phrases and ways of teaching young people that they don't want to be violent, and that may be the tool. Also, Senator Harris endorses this bill. We want to know that because all these organizations want to sit with her when she endorses this and just keep the momentum going. So please let us know if she gets on top of it. And that goes for all the other staff with your Congress members. We want to give them support and visibility when they do the right things.
Okay, I think Dr.
Yeah, so I just want to say the data piece of it is actually really important. So one of the things that we look at is the predictability of violence, right? So you have violence hotspots, right? What happens is because people are not reporting, you have to assume that either before or after whatever you implement, the non-reporting is similar. The incidence of non-reporting is similar. But the other way you can also test it is what is people's perception of their safety before or after something is actually implemented. I think that even in this country, we ought to look at what is your perception of your safety now compared to last year or compared to 2 years ago. And most people will say they've been feeling increasingly unsafe, right?
I'm going to piggyback on also and just say, I guess my question is, wouldn't another metric for success be measured by, for example, if de-escalation techniques and trainings take place with police officers, of success be a lower, like the number of police shootings and deaths by gun violence, citizens who are shot and killed by police officers, if that number decreases after training, I would assume that that's a metric for success also. Okay, next question, sir.
Good morning. I want to thank you for putting this on, Congresswoman. My name is General Parker. I'm from Peoria, Illinois. I was invited to this event this morning by my good friend, Mr. Franklin Malone from my fathers. But I have a lot of questions, and I'm going to space them out to give everybody else a chance. But what I'm missing right now is the issue of race and racism, and the fact that that leads to escalation and de-escalation. And
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay, so I am not Congressman Gwen Moore. But I am not a member of Congress. I am so far from being a member of Congress. The closest I can come, I was telling Senator Harris's staffer, is that Senator Harris and I went to college together, and our fathers went to high school together in Jamaica. That's as close as I get to being a member of Congress. So I can't answer that question for you directly, but I did want to touch on and let you know with regard to Congresswoman Moore's draft legislation. I'm taking a look at a copy of the bill, and she addresses racism and the issue of racism in the bill. And I will just tell you quickly that, for example, in the initial definitions, she references a term called racial conciliation. And in that bill, in the draft bill, it says that racial conciliation means a process of reconciliation that recognizes that racism is both systemic and institutionalized with far-reaching effects on political engagement and economic opportunities for minorities. It empowers local communities through relationship building and truth-telling, and emphasizes restorative justice as an essential component. And there's more in the bill, and I'm sure that Dr. Myers would be happy to share a copy of the bill with you. I also want to say I am so sorry about your loss. Putting on my, again, like media hat and political analyst hat, there is absolutely no question whatsoever that we have a very, very serious problem in the country where black men, black boys, and quite frankly, black women and girls today are often penalized just for being born and being black. And we live in an environment where people see you, they fear you, and quite frankly, so many people have not faced any penalties after unlawfully killing our people, that it lends people to believe that they continue to do so. And I believe that Congressman Gwen Moore's legislation is just one of many aspects and avenues by which we can begin to address that problem. I don't know if there's anybody else on the panel that wanted to address that.
So thank you again for your question. And yes, Congresswoman Gwen Moore does. And I resonate with what you said, because it's not just racial biases. I see that may be a challenge. I think that one of the challenges that we may have come across is the unconscious biases, is why some people may feel like this will not apply to them, and how will we be able to get them to understand that this does apply to everyone, and that we may have to make sure that whether you are red state, blue state, whether you feel like your neighborhood is safer than the others, that it's important that we recognize and get this training so that it helps not only it will help them individually as well. So we do have to understand that there is a racial biases, but we also have to bring up unconscious biases that will prevent people from resonating with this themselves.
Right. Because I got like a Facebook page, we have over 1 million followers. It's called Urban Intellectuals. And we put
What's it called?
Urban Intellectuals.
Okay.
And we put different instances like this almost daily up there, like the farm went down, the young man up in Minneapolis, those down in Baton Rouge, all over this country, where people even, they comply with law officers, and they still end up getting beat up, shot, killed, or like a Sandra Bland. I'm sitting in my car smoking my cigarette, but I still got to lose my life. It wasn't the officer that was the one that escalated the issue. But we also put where you can have a white man with a shotgun and come out police, and they'll do everything they can, but they'll bring him in alive, just like the little boy that killed 9 people down in South Carolina Charleston Church. I mean, they always seem to be able to make it in alive, but we always seem to die. Even if we if I fall like that, I have a problem with what the officer was saying, well, you know what buttons you can use to, upset your parents, but the police aren't our parents, they're not going to love me like my parents. And at the same time, those kids don't get paid and trained to do the job and be professional. They're just kids. So instead of putting the onus on our children, I think we need to start putting it where it really matters, on people who are trained and supposed to be professional and supposed to handle this issue.
if you don't mind me asking, if you were a legislator, what would you do? Like, like you sit at home, you watch the news, and you're like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Here's what I would do. Like, what would you do?
Well, I know a lot of legislators. Generally, in my state and a couple others, legislators, I'm very outspoken. And the thing is that we have a very serious issue with white supremacy in this country that we never dealt with. And until we start dealing with that issue itself, police are never going to see black people as real people. We all want to be beneath them. That makes it easier for them to do the things that they do to us. Because they don't see us as equal. They see us, that's our slavery, that's our Jim Crow. They saw us beneath them. We weren't human to them. So until we start dealing with the issues that are really out there that nobody wants to talk about, we just put Band-Aids on a big star.
One comment, and the urban intellectuals will be tremendous supporters of this bill, so we hope that you'll mobilize that million people. In the bill, Congresswoman Moore has been very, very skillful and courageous in spelling it out. Like she talks about implicit bias. Implicit bias is just what you're talking about. You see somebody and you automatically assume that they're going to act a certain way. She has that language in here, along with racial reconciliation. So what we have to do is to keep that language from getting scrubbed out by those who say, well, we're all for de-escalation, but we don't want to talk about implicit bias. So we have to help her keep the words in there, because already there are people raising questions about why does this phrase have to be in there. So we hope that you'll get a copy of it and educate your team and ask them to contact their congresspeople.
Well, I signed the list up there, so just tell me what I need to do.
Steph, we're going to hear from Marcus, and then we have a question here.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to point one thing out, because you did say something about it's not the youth's job to take on the responsibility. But in my story, I talked about how it was the peer mediation and the emotional training that I received that helped me as a youth to be able to change the way that I thought and the way that I interacted with my peers. Sometimes we underestimate the abilities of the power of the youth, and how their influence is what is, a lot of youth are the ones that are fearless and that are willing to go in and have conversations with people that a lot of adults will stay away from. So I want to make sure that we understand that the training has to find a way to be able to get into the hands of the youth, and that we support them as they are doing the work as well.
Thank you so much. We've got 2 more questions here and here. We're going to take those 3. Okay, well, if you're okay, I'm okay. We can stay. Is that Steph? Okay. All right, let's go.
Okay. I don't know, what time is it? I feel like
It's 10:10. We're gonna get to everybody.
5 o'clock. Came early. My name is Phyllis Coley, and I have like several heads. I am the partner leader of Guidance and Counseling in Baltimore City, and I actually worked where the block where Freddie Gray got killed. So that's my neighborhood and my kids. I actually had one of the kids from The Wire in my classroom. He was on a television show. I actually have a nonprofit called Pure Potential Enterprises, and we teach empowerment, leadership, and I help kids, undeserved kids, go to college. I give them scholarships, and I give them to school and college. So my statement is, 1, I would like the verbiage to be changed to educators, not just teachers in that bill, because as an educator, I am sometimes told about how I want to kill myself, how I want to kill others. So as a professional school counselor, I'm on the front line, so I think educators instead of teachers. And the second thing I would like to say, in Noble, Greg Thomas is a very good friend of mine, and I've been working with several youth organizations. What I want to bring to the table is something that each one of you said in a different way. That's value. We have to find some way to value each and every human being. When I talk to my students, my best compliments I've received in my whole entire life, they said, Ms. Coley, you make me feel like I could do anything. Because I'm the cheerleader. You see, I don't care if you have a 1.5 or a 4.3. There's a plan for you. And I think once we insert that value as far as the father, I hear what you're saying, because when I have empowerment, I brought in the Naval Academy cues to my conference. I saw the difference in the young man from Rayburn who has a 720 math score, but he needed his father in his life. So those the men at my conference, I was smart enough to know, go get them. And so they came in and they did a boxing. Well, we did yoga, they did boxing. So you have to make sure you're intentional, and I heard the word intentional. You do the psychosocial, make sure you know all the different things. So when we have that combination, I think we can de-escalate, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said. I'm also a parental education specialist for Baltimore City. When you teach little kids about value and valuing other people, that will change the paradigm, right? We have peer mediation in my school. That changes the paradigm because they make an appointment to, please understand that. Where you're going to be at, across the street, behind you want to fight. I never knew they made, but when we had peer mediation, they were like, let's stop this. And you go to your peer tell you what you can and you cannot do. So all of these different things and methods, it's not a cookie cutter approach. So I just want to say I commend you. Thank you, Danielle, for inviting me because I was Miss Baltimore County Woman of the Year, Amanda South 5 Woman of the Year. So I have been in the community doing this work, and she was one of mine, and also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta. She gave me the symbol. And Danielle actually was one of my community honorees because we also honor people in the community. So I just want to thank you for this, and I'm like, look here today, and I'm so glad I did.
Thank you. We've got a question here, and then we'll come.
So I'm going to make it short because a lot of people said what I already wanted to say. I worked in law enforcement for 16 years in federal law enforcement and investigations. I'm part of ICE, and I had to lead the community. I spoke to a couple of individuals, captains, colonels, and the main thing what the young man in the back said is that it's an innate feeling. Like we're trying to change the culture of violence with Black women for positive change. We need to change the mindset of the law enforcement officers. What some of the guys I spoke to, he said they have the training, they have the de-escalation training. But like he mentioned, at first I used to say, I know they know the difference because you can just think someone of color is guilty or has a gun and you shoot them 30, 40, 50 times. But I see it change when the young man shot 5 individual police officers and one died, but he was still taken in. Or just like the situation at the church in North Carolina or South Carolina, I forget which one. But they took him in and they said, it's just a different approach. So we know they know better, but it's innately the mental perspective of the way in which they think. So we need to change that. Once we change that, and I love how we add the community in as well. So if we can just change that mindset, I think we'll see a big difference as well.
Thank you so much. Can I say something on the, please?
Yeah, I wanted to say something on the police brutality, just because as an emergency medicine physician, I'm part of the 911 system and part of the police system, and I want to just say a couple of things on that. Is that one is a lot of times the training does exist, right? But we have to realize that our professions have not done a good job around burnout. Good job around weeding out bad employees. And those structures and those systems don't particularly exist to deal with those two issues. And when you either have someone who's, either a bad cop, could be a bad physician, could be a bad nurse, or someone who's burned out, there's not a structure, there's not a system within our profession to actually manage that. Okay? So, and because of that, you see the police brutality. The situation with police brutality, I have seen police officers abuse patients in the emergency department. I've had to actually pull them closer so that I can keep my eye on them. I have seen same things, firefighters, EMS, emergency medicine physicians. So you have to realize there's a level of stress associated with this sort of work that we actually haven't figured out how we can be healthy and do the job long term.
Thank you so much, sir.
Just
We'll bring it back next.
Yeah, I just want a quick comment. I've been involved with a lot of young men
and also noble. And there's an issue that, I mean, even before you get to de-escalation, you got to get to it. And what I found out was really kind of shocking to me to listen to the conversation, especially with the young man, is the question of trust, which if you don't trust somebody, then you fear it. Okay? And that's a real problem. I mean, I know from a bill point of view, you got to get to de-escalation. I can't de-escalate if I'm scared. And then you hear the police will say, well, I shot it because I was afraid. So now we got on both sides of the fence. That causes a serious problem. And I know it's kind of hard to legislate that, but that needs to be addressed. Because I'm listening to, I mean, not a few young men, a lot of young men feel that way. So that's set up for disaster right now. Just because both sides are fear.
Thank you. Mariah, would you pass it right here?
Quick comment, if I could.
Oh,
just wanted to comment. I've heard a couple people now talk about holding law enforcement accountable for their actions, and absolutely, we need to hold law enforcement accountable for their actions. There are a lot of law enforcement that are doing what they're supposed to do, but there are some that are out there that are not. And so we need to hold them accountable and do what's necessary to file the proper complaints. But don't lose sight of the fact, I think the gentleman said in the back, at the end of the day, I did, again, many years in law enforcement, but at the end of the day, I am a father of 2 black males. And so, as a father of black men, we have to have a different conversation with our sons than other races do. And so, the point that I was making with teaching youth about de-escalation and not escalating, that's so that our sons and our daughters can go home safe at the end of the day. That's not taking police officers off of the hook for their actions, but that's being proactive as opposed to being reactive in ensuring our children come home. Unfortunately, that is the fact of society today, that we have to have those conversations with them. So please don't get in this misconstrued. We need to hold our officers accountable for those things. But at the same time, we need to continue to educate our youth as well.
I want to jump in here while we're on this. I gotta tell you a quick story. Rashard Price went to West Virginia State University. One of my mentees, car driving down 40, the car breaks down, they got a BB gun in the car. They pull over in front of a detention center. The guard comes out, says, "What's up with you guys?" A car full of black guys. "What's up with you guys?" And he didn't understand what the young man said. He said they were broke down, but that ain't what he got. Next thing you know, 8 state troopers in front of them, guns pointed, they're in the car. They said, "We want you to get out of that car right now." Rashad said, "Do not get out of this car." He said, "I want everybody to roll the windows down and stick your hands out so that your hands." Then he said, "We want you to come and get us. We have a BB gun in the car. And we're going to keep our hands up so you can see them." And the officer said after they came and got them out safely, they were going to shoot you. It's about knowing and teaching what you need to do when that time comes. And there are young men out here, peers, who we can teach. What do you do when you're stopped by the police? It's a thought. Now, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's a real story.
My name is Emmanuel Lipscomb. I'm an executive director, district executive director of outreach for Moms in Action of every town. I'm also been for a lot of years. I'm a rescuer and survivor of 9/11 and part of the steering for the 9/11. And we were actually able, going back to where you were when discussing this bill, we were actually able to take 2 ideas that we needed to get approved by Congress and take them all the way through so they became laws. So all of you going back to your here's the answer to the question I know your congressmen and your senators will want to know. And they measure this by votes. That's what's important to them. People in their communities want their communities to be safe. They want for there to be firm ground. All of us come together regardless of our race, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of everything, to one thing, that when our kids or when we walk the streets, we want for those streets to be safe. And everything every person up here has talked about will happen in a positive way if the environment, if the ground of our communities are safe. So when we go to them, we don't just our bills were done unanimously in a situation that didn't seem like things were going to be done unanimously. So what we did is we went to the offices and we talked to the head of staffing in those offices also. And we said, can we get someone in your office that works with the people back in your home state to help support, and like in this case, stopping violence in the community? And we added them on. So we built a network, because it's not just about getting the bill passed, it's about the process. And each organization is bringing that thing that's common between us all and helping us. Nobody gets left behind. And all that being left behind, and all that means is votes. Come on.
Thank you. Could you repeat the name of the organizations you're affiliated with?
The Moms that are in Action for Gun Sense, Every Town for Against Gun Violence, the Martin Luther King Family Life Institute, Incubate, Let's Spread the Love, NAACP. I work there.
Okay, so you were one of the zealots that Dr. Myers talked about earlier this morning. All right, so let me just show you what we're going to do in terms of order. We're going to go here, and then did you have a question from Senator Harris's office? Yes?
I did.
Okay, so we're going to go here, we're going to go to you, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to call it a day. Okay, thank you. Here you go. Thanks, Mariah.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I want to personally thank Congresswoman Gwen for this wonderful piece of legislation. I am Rhonda Hamilton. I'm actually Executive Director of My Mother's Keeper. We are a mental health advocacy. I am a native of Washington, D.C. and educated in D.C., so I love this great city. I was so concerned at all the instances of violence as it related to trauma. I was concerned about the families, more importantly in areas of the city that are already challenging receiving mental health care and services. I am a member of a family of mental health. I watched my beautiful mom navigate the city for over 30 years, coming through the many systems and resources. Mental health that I noticed is that the system as a whole, I felt was using yesterday's knowledge to build today's very complex mental health challenges. I felt that the stigmas were growing. I felt that it was important that folks understood all of the auxiliary issues that we deal with. My organization, on a community level, weekly provides behavioral health workshops for children in a Ward 8 Southeast community. I'm specifically this morning speaking of, because I'm hoping that in Congresswoman Gwen's bill that she will make specific reference to the inclusion of the mental health advocates that are out here. I chose to have our organization come from a preventative standpoint, being a child of mental health, because I felt that all too often that we were not focusing on the root causes. I felt that many in the community weren't able to recognize the red flag concerns, the de-escalation situations that we were living with, those of us in the communities. So the de-escalation in the neighborhoods for me is second nature, because it's something as well as my mom. With the children, I agree that it's so easy to be able to impress upon them, because they do, their little brains soak it up and they enjoy the understanding of such. What I wanted to speak to specifically, the gentleman here mentioned about the millennial population and how it is very important that we keep them at the table or invite them to the table. One of the things that we are dealing with in the community, such as Ward 8 Southeast, is the trust factor. Being a mental health advocate, wanting to, we are proponents for relationship with the police. We have shootings on a daily basis. When these are happening, we are calling for immediate crime meetings. We're out to the police law enforcement who have been very helpful. But what we're dealing with is the fact that the trust of the millennial generation as it relates to us being an agency calling in the police to say, hey, well, I came from a community of the village. I came from a day where we had officer friendly. So I'm on a daily basis trying to reintroduce this understanding. We're having great success on the children level. However, it's my millennial and my young black men that we need more support. So I do appreciate this de-escalation bill, but I do hope that Congresswoman Gwen will take heed that we need something prior to the de-escalation in communities where trust is such an issue. Because we do have guns going off, and trying to step in the middle of a gun balance situation that's getting ready to happen is something that I deal with daily, and I make conscious decisions as to whether or not this is something I want to step into. So I applaud Congressman Gwen for even being on having it on the radar. But we are definitely using yesterday to understand to deal with a very complex and prevalent matter, and so I applaud you all as well.
Thank you very much.
I just want to respond very briefly about your comment also, and it also connects with your comment about trust. Once this bill is passed, it's passed language in there about working with community agencies, community departments, community organizations. Part of the process will be you will have individuals at the table to help to create ways within the community to de-escalate violence. It's through working at the table that will help to develop the level of trust. But what's important is that we make sure that this gets passed so that we can get to that level. So we have to make sure that Gwen Moore has the support to get it passed. And so we can be able to then take that conversation to the next level of building the trust. We have to, got to build the foundation.
Can I say something just really quickly? There is no psychiatrist east of the river.
Absolutely.
Okay? So when I was talking about no psychiatrist, you're talking about guns going off, there's no psychiatrist east of the river. And if you are on Medicaid and you have a child who's significantly mentally ill, Medicaid only pays for 30 minutes of therapy.
Absolutely.
So I want us to get to why this is happening.
Absolutely. And that word advocate is so important. People hear mental health and they revert back to what they believe they understand that to be or look like.
Right.
And so I'm constantly trying to knock down those stereotypes daily.
Thank you. Question.
In Senator Harris's office, and I just had a question. Is there any examples in states or localities of de-escalation programs already successfully being implemented? And also, is there an explicit link made in the bill, especially because mental health is an issue that we talk about a lot here, between de-escalation training and providing people the resources available to connect people with mental health resources as part of de-escalation?
Dr. Williams? There is a program in Seattle, Washington that addresses de-escalation. I've not been there, I can't examine it. Those are good questions, and I hope that the senator's staff will find the answers. We don't have them all in terms of that. And in terms of the mental health part of it, the bill talks about the importance of being aware and recognition of mental health and substance abuse issues and crisis intervention strategies. So there's a component in the bill that talks about community outreach, social media, and evaluation, and understanding mental health and the impact of it. So it's very broad in many ways, but how that's going to be applied has to be developed.
And also, I would note in the bill, there is a portion of the bill that deals with an appointed advisory boards, and I would assume that those advisory boards would include mental health professionals and the different subspecialties of professions that people have been talking about today. Okay, you had a question.
Thank you for this. I'm Frances Adele, and I have a great boss, Congressman Cleaver, and I believe this is something that you would be interested in. And so we're actually working on a bill that addresses teen suicide, especially in schools, and with the mental health piece as well. And so the one thing we've come across is sort of controlling the quality of training that is involved in this. And so the question about the bill is there language in there, or how are we controlling, making sure that these communities are actually getting quality training, not just any de-escalation training, but one that is relevant, one that is addressing unconscious biases and conscious biases. And so just wanting to know if those things have been thought through in knowing that there's quality behind the training. Thank you.
Did you want to address that?
The bill does address certified, I believe it talks about having certified de-escalation training and cultural competence, racial reconciliation, implicit bias, mental health issues, substance abuse, all those are mentioned. So as the advisory committee develops more, there is supposed to be an appointed group of stakeholders on the advisory committee to help refine how this is done. But it's not all, down to the bottom. But Congressman Cleaver's input will be tremendous. We hope he'll endorse this and be a part of it.
I would say I just did an event with Congressman Cleaver during the Congressional Black Caucus, and before the event, he was telling me about someone who set off a bomb in his office in his home district. And listening to you speak, I now wonder if that person had a mental health issue that we automatically took for racism. Maybe it was racism combined with a mental health issue, but I mean, you've given us a lot of food for thought today. You had.
I just want to make a quick statement because you asked me a question earlier about if I was a legislator, what would I do? I took some leadership training up in New York, and the founder of that organization, Gwen, he made a profound statement. He said, those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but always farther from the resources. So even in drafting this bill, I'll get the people who are affected by it, and I'll get the people who do the affected. Even no matter how racist they are, get in their mind, see what's up with them, get the people who are young millennials, mental health people, people on substance abuse. I will have them be a part of
the discussions.
Yeah, the discussions. That way, I think we can write a more better, more detailed bill that can solve the problem.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. The bill will be. Are you going to post the draft bill? If you can on the website, I would urge everyone who's interested to take a look at it. Congresswoman Moore, at least from my perspective, is so dedicated to this issue, and she'll listen. Call her, send an email to the office. All perspectives are important. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. The panels have been asked you to stay so we can take a group photo. To everyone who joined us today, thank you very much. It was our honor and pleasure to have all of you join us today. Thank you for being foot soldiers for justice. We are going to, it's not if this bill is going to pass. This bill is going to pass. To our congressional staffers, go back, get your bosses to sign on, and let's do good. Thank you very much.
Be sure to get your flyers. This is the week of nonviolence, positive change, and opportunities. So get involved. Thank you.
Aren't they good?
Thank you so much.
Oh, sure, thank you. I thought you were, yes, hi. Okay, all right, thank you. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Good? Do you have anyone that you work with? Thank you. If I look at my camera, did I hear you? Do you have an accent, Jamaican accent? Nigerian. Okay, nice to meet you. I used to do a lot of legal work in Nigeria. I did. So I used to spend a lot, I would fly to Lagos, but I used to spend a lot of time in Abuja. Right after Sani Abacha died, I was there. A long time ago, but I was there as a lawyer working on the privatization of like the telecom industry and telecom and something else. I was working with the Bureau of Privatization, and we had